Hello.
Hello.
I feel like I haven't seen you guys in a long time. I missed you.
I feel like the same thing. Where have you been?
Where have I been? That is a good question. Where have I been? I've been places.
I've been
Um,
everywhere, man.
I know
I've
that's
been
exactly
everywhere.
what happened last week. Oh, I was sick last week. Ugh,
Oh,
that's where I was last week. And then I feel like maybe it was the 10th or the 3rd I joined and y'all were already I joined late and I think y'all were already done one day. Oh
we do
yeah,
that.
yeah. I had a another conflict for to start, and I think I was when I joined, you were gone.
We do that
Anyway,
sometimes. Not all the time, but we do it sometimes.
yeah.
Derek, good to
Um,
see you today.
gonna
Hey,
rotate down to.
Derek, have you met Jory?
Oh, I don't know if I've met Derek. Hi, let me see my.
yeah, I think back a few months
Oh,
ago.
oh yeah,
It's
we do.
there.
Yeah, we've been. I navigated away from my computer. I met Derek. I don't remember when or where, or how, but
Gotta make sure. Did
um,
you
we
get did you get pinged, Derek? I think we had someone join us last week. Philip Lane was
Yeah, I
asking
talked to
about
him
the
about
viewer.
it.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't updated that one. I think we last time it came up was a couple months ago. There was a few changes we talked about adding for the repository naming. I think we got those in, so I can go back and update that one. Yeah, there's a few aspects of the original PR that we said, hey, there's some introduction of naming that we don't have elsewhere. And I think we've resolved that now.
Yeah, I remember looking at it a while back and it said that it needs a big rebase, and you mentioned you wanted to do a little bit of cleaning up on it. So whenever you get that done, I'll be happy to review it. Cool. Well, we're a couple minutes after. We got a handful of folks here. There are a few things. I'm not going to share screen today just because Zoom is still funny on me and I've yet to reboot. I probably should get around to rebooting one of these years, but this is not the year for it. Um, but the chat is sitting out there if anybody wants to follow along that way. A couple of these things need review from image spec. So if anybody's got time to do that, that would be good. Give folks a few links here, things to review. Image spec, one of them was getting rid of some of the references to master. The other one was me making Tianon happy with pinning releases on our pinning all the external references when we do a release. And Tianon has offered to be the permanent or the permanent reference for handling that crazy JQ text that's going on in that one. I disavow all responsibility for that. Those two need a review, and then distribution spec needs a review as well on verifying some digest. Like of all those, the distribution spec is the easiest one to knock out. Get some people checked in here since folks are coming in. You haven't missed any important stuff yet.
I'm trying to remember on that digest one if there was still a weird case with the original V1 or the schema 1 images where that's not actually true.
That would be a Docker schema one though, right?
It would. Yeah.
So
I don't remember. I
do
remember
we
there was
need to do
some
that for the, do we need that for the OCI spec?
I don't remember if there was something weird about that though. Well, in that V1 or OCI spec registries we're potentially serving that content. I'm not talking about Docker, like
Okay.
the V1 registry. I mean, I'm willing to move past the schema one anyways. I'm just trying to remember from a historical perspective if we there was a weird case where the digest was like pre-processed, or the content was pre-processed before the digest was checked, which was one of the reasons why schema one was bad.
Well, way back in the day, there wasn't a digest, but we'll try to
Yeah,
forget
it's
those
like
days.
post that time. This is, yeah, the first version of the V2 registry that was using schema one, like had a built-in signature, but that built-in signature actually reduced the security of reduced the security of it because it required pre-processing the content before checking the digest. And we concluded, hey, it's better to check the digest before you do anything. Like, signature should be detached, and that was how we got schema 2 and what we have today. But because of that, there was some weird cases where you would request the digest, and if it was a schema 1 image, the response body wasn't directly checked against that digest. It was processed as a signature and then checked.
So I thought that the digest in that case on the schema one wasn't on the overall body, but it was on the envelope data inside of the body. And so you have to
Exactly.
unpack one layer to get into that actual digest.
Yes. But that would make this statement not true for that case.
So I'll go into the history of where this one came from, and then maybe that may
And I'm not
clarify
saying
some
we
of it.
shouldn't take it. I'm just saying
Yeah.
that was something
Yeah.
that
The case
existed.
they came up with here is, say they have an evil registry where I, as a client, say, give me digest 123, and the registry comes back and says, here is the manifest you has asked for. And oh, by the way, the digest is 456. And, many more numbers than that. But if the registry tells you a different digest than what you requested, the idea here is that the client should be verifying the digest that it requested, not the digest that the registry came back with. I feel like in the case of Schema V1, that the digest you're requesting is still going to be in that envelope data in there. So it's either way, you've got a digest, and it's just, do you trust the registry digest or do you trust the digest that you requested as the client?
I mean, you should never trust the registry digest. I agree with that. It's more of the response body matches this digest, which I I'm fine merging that because that is a should case because you shouldn't use schema one. So that's I think yeah that that can be true. I just want to clarify the minefield
Yeah.
that schema one leaves us.
Would it make more sense to say the manifest digest, and that way we're getting away from digest of what? It's just the digest of the manifest, and Schema V1 defines a different way of computing its digest.
Thinking.
I'm almost thinking of potential future cases out there where maybe we come up with another manifest type where the digest is computed somehow differently.
Yeah, or what if it's the case where the second one, client should verify that the response body matches the requested digest and the response header digest. What if the response header digest is a different algorithm,
Yeah.
but it's the same content?
I I would be comfortable in the second one to get rid of that and the response header digest and just say client just verify what they asked for.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes sense because if the registry comes back with another digest, it's fine for the client to verify that digest, but they should verify it against their original digest as well.
Yeah.
So if the registry says, hey, it's a SHA-512, and it's like, okay, you can verify the SHA-512, but you should also verify the one you gave, and then you could verify that those SHAs are the same, because otherwise, yeah. But I agree with the general notion that we shouldn't trust what the registry returns. I mean, I think that's a premise of content addressability, but we should make that clear.
Okay.
So
You want to work on the review?
Yeah, I'll leave a comment on that one because yeah, I think the response header digest. What would you recommend for um
I would say instead of response body, I would say the manifest digest. And then on the second one, where we're saying the response header digest, I would just get rid of that and the response header digest entirely.
yeah, makes sense.
Sajay, Ram, either of you, Ryan, anybody else have concerns? Tinan.
So is there a language in the spec which says the registries should also validate content before accepting it into the registry?
I think we have that somewhere. I hope we do.
Just to close the loop on that discussion.
If we don't, would you like to make a pull request?
Okay.
That's an if we don't. I'm thinking we probably do have that in there, but if we don't, then that would be deserving of one. Yeah, where this is going to get more interesting is when we start putting some extra verbiage in here around SHA-512 or any other digest algorithm, because we don't have that right now. All right, so got those covered. Any questions on the image spec ones? Okay, I see I got an approved from Sajay. That gives me two of my approves, and Tianan, you're still holding on the first one. And on the second one, you're approving that. So Tianan, am I assuming correctly you'll take off your hold on 1207 once 1208 gets merged?
Yeah, I already commented that, right?
Yeah. So we just need one more review on 1208 and then we can move that one forward too. Okay.
Yeah, I'm happy with 1207 if we get 1208 too.
Sounds good. All right. Those were the only review things in there. Sounds like we got eyes looking at all of those. Give everybody something to do for the Thursday. I feel like the big news this week is Run-C had a release. So ta-da, yay for that. I haven't been following closely enough, but it sounded like that one was a lot of work in the process. So I figured they need a little bit of kudos for that.
Do we have anything that we typically do to celebrate those kinds of things? Like in our social channels, we usually make sure it goes into a newsletter. Or this is my first, I think, release with you guys or time of project. Yeah.
I just want the ta-da emoji. That was a big one.
Okay, there you go.
Isn't
Other-
there something that Chris normally does that's like required by the charter or something?
There is stuff we do for specs. I don't know what we
Oh,
do
yeah.
for projects. Because like for a spec release, that definitely goes out with all kinds of other stuff. It might be good to ping a couple of the maintainers over there and say, hey, would you like to do a blog post on it? That would be a nice general, nice to have.
Okay.
Do we have any of them over here today? I don't
Or
keep
at
track
least
of
even
anything.
just notifying the mailing list, which I've tried to do something about the spam lately, but well,
I've noticed it's definitely trimmed down.
oh, good.
It's nowhere near as insane as it used to be. Frantically pulling up the maintainers on that project over there. So we don't have Cypher here today. Or any of the others. Yeah, I see a bunch of names there, handful that I recognize, and none of them are here. So yeah, give them a ping.
Okay.
Let them know that it'll be good to get out a blog post on it and see what they want to do there.
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
All right. The other one I wanted to pull kind of to the top of the list because I know Sajay likes to run off for other meetings. I think he really enjoys running out here early, is the deprecation annotation stuff. Because I feel like we kind of went halfway through that discussion last week and then he had to run off. So I want to make sure we didn't like lose any ideas you were thinking of, Sajay. This was for 903.
No, sorry. I got hiccups.
That's all right. 903 mostly. A little bit of this 1152 as well. Kind of dropping all these in the chat. But when we were talking about the annotation for deprecating or end of support, end of life kind of stuff, you were mentioning that you had stuff that you were pushing as a separate artifact, and we were kind of going back and forth. Does it need to be an annotation in the image? Does it need to be external? Does OCI need to specify this at all?
I think, I don't know. I mean, we at least had a scenario where EOL goes beyond the image itself. And so this thing is more fluid, is what we identified. So I'm not sure whether that would go in the image. But you did mention that putting a nominal manifest just for annotation might be an overhead also, right? So,
Yeah, I think a lot of the discussion last week was really hitting on, since the image can't change, like Tianan is saying, there's no really support for that. It's you get a new image when something needs to be supported or patched or whatever.
Oh yeah, we stopped at the conversation of what's the story for what needs to be patched, right? Just the end of life alone might not be good enough.
Yeah. I was honestly going to go in a completely different direction, but I don't want to derail from some of the stuff you've already been working on. But I was starting to think, do we need an expiration time on manifest? And that was more thinking along the lines of people are pushing a lot of these artifacts up there, and you might be doing a weekly update of an artifact. Do you want to say this artifact is going to live for 2 weeks, and once it's past that, registries might garbage collect it? You might have some kind of policy around that that says, hey, if I see this annotation, get rid of it after a certain period of time.
That's kind of what we're doing. So when many teams are publishing across, what we're saying is tell us how long you need to keep the image around. So that we can either purge it or mark it. Like there's a bunch of things that these images don't get updated, so don't flag them for updates and things like that. So all those workflows kind of get tripped off this metadata that's attached to this image. And it's highly unlikely that we would ever add this to the image itself because it gets moved around and rebuilt and whatnot. So purging is definitely one scenario. We have considered like introducing like native concepts like TTLs for images, which I'm guessing many people have wanted, but I don't think it ever came up in this context. But that's pretty much the use case that we are using it for, which is end of life is an indication that this image either will not be supported or might be deleted in some way.
Yeah, I feel like deleting an image is a very different conversation from supporting an image, but it's interesting you're
Right.
lumping those together as well.
Yeah, it depends on the location. So we have like a bunch of staging registries where somebody might push an image, and there's no reason to keep that around because it generates like nightly bills and a lot of things. So it's a way to just purge them off, but maybe on an external, much more reliable or required source, we'd keep that much longer and make sure that the both the manifest and the referrer is available, so that consumers can use that. So maybe it is an overuse of the thing, but it depends on the context in which it's used, is what we have seen. Listening to what Tianan was saying last time, I think the idea is to get what next, not just throwing just throwing the EOL is not, it's not an end-to-end use case in any way. That's kind of what I was taking away from the conversation.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious of any knee-jerk reactions from Derek and Tianan on some kind of expiration date for manifest and integrating that with an optional garbage collection policy on potentially a very large registry out there. Not naming names.
An expiration in the manifest itself?
Yeah, having an annotation that says this manifest is going to last for 3 months. After that, I don't need it anymore.
What's the use case?
A couple of them. One of them I was thinking of was I might be doing a vulnerability scan every week, and maybe I don't care about a vulnerability scan that's 3 weeks old, but I'm going to keep pushing this stuff to the registry all the time on like some recurring basis.
So wouldn't that be better served by your tool that's pushing that registry scan, going and deleting those older scan results? Since it knows that the one it just did is the canonical scan result and should be the only scan result?
Potentially, you introduce race conditions if somebody was already pulling the old one, but potentially. That also assumes that the tool doing the pushing has the ability to do the deleting.
But if the tool doing the pushing doesn't have permission to delete objects, then the policy that it provides that says the object should be automatically deleted should also be ignored, because the tool doing the pushing doesn't have permission to delete the object. And it's the one stating that this object should be deleted at some point in the future. And so if it doesn't have permission, that deletion shouldn't happen.
It's getting into API level access versus policies in the repository.
Sure, but the creator of that object doesn't have permission to delete that object, and so shouldn't have permission to say that that object should be deleted either. Otherwise, they can just bypass the permission.
It would, I feel like if I ever implemented it, I would implement it as a policy that the repository owner could implement. And so it would be the repository owner saying, look, they don't have access to directly delete manifest in here, but they have a certain policy, it kicks in, and I'm checking different things on these manifests. When I see a certain scenario, including information that they're providing me, I'm making decisions on that.
Yeah, knee-jerk reaction is that's not a strong use case. Let's hear the next one. I'm not convinced, Brandon. Convince me.
I've also seen.
I don't
Go ahead,
think
Dick.
that it's such a problem to have such annotations, but yeah, I would be hesitant to mandate a policy implementation around it. But if we want to define a set of annotations around kind of creation date or kind of expiration date, I think that's fine. Expiration date still sounds kind of weird to me, but like, do we have a set of annotations today that are expected around that sort of metadata around create time and stuff like that?
Only the creation time. Everything else has been pushed off by the maintainers as saying we don't have the use case for it yet.
Well, I'm
But
not a
that's-
maintainer there, I guess.
Yeah. I still value your input.
I would just say, yeah, I wouldn't want to define a required policy around it, but
Yeah.
having a a common annotation for what it means, and I don't think it's a problem.
I don't think we would ever say, here's the policy for how someone should implement garbage collection, but I do like the idea of giving metadata that people can use to make decisions.
I mean, in Containerd, we use similar approaches for garbage collection as well, allowing expiration labels. So it's not such a bad way to do garbage collection policy from my perspective. I guess I shouldn't say that as a negative. It's a good way to do garbage collection, not that it's not a bad, maybe point positives there.
But having an image that purports to self-destruct seems weird. Because the whole point of the content addressability is that they are accessible in perpetuity.
Maybe, but it's not up to I guess from that perspective, it's what to keep and not keep. A registry does not need to implement it. It could be a client side thing that filters it.
Yeah. So for the use case that you presented, Brandon, I think that Derek's proposal for referrers is actually a better solution, where the client controls the referrers totally and does a push of the referrers, because in that case, your scanner client can have a race-free way to remove all of those previous referrers from the referrers response. I've seen ttl.sh, it's cute.
Destroys the entire idea that since it's content addressable, it must live forever.
Well,
It's like,
what I mean is, like, say I pull some image from ttl.sh into my local Containerd content store. Now I have that content, and if Containerd were to automatically delete that content, even though I still have like an image referencing it, that would be surprising to me.
I think that would be a configuration option you would have the choice of setting.
Sure. But the image deciding when it gets deleted is something that I would argue heavily should be disabled by default.
No, Athena, I see your point. Actually, thinking it through, it makes sense. So let's say you move that image from one registry to the other in the next year, and the TTL or expiration time is in the past. The registry would be free to immediately delete it if that was the case. Maybe that's what you want, but I think is that your concern? Like the target system might use that unintentionally, or
Yeah, it's like this is the life cycle of these objects is something that has been determined by the operator of the thing storing those objects. So in the Containerd case, it's me as the operator deleting them or trusting Containerd's garbage collection to delete them for me. But it has well-defined parameters for when and where it deletes objects. It's not just randomly deleting things because they said they should be deleted. It's not the image author decided that this content should be deleted for me.
I don't think I would make this the only thing a garbage collection looks at. I feel like it's an extra bit of metadata that a policy could use. So if you just copy the image in and just load it, you might say automatically every image that I just create must live for at least this long. That could be part of your policy.
Sounds like you want an even more aggressive garbage collection policy in that case, where it's the opposite. We're saying don't delete it before this. But you have to see that implemented.
It's more than I'm thinking when I'm making a policy. If an image can tell me that I don't need to keep it anymore, it lets me potentially move it up in the queue. And I might have a queue that's going to keep something for at least a certain amount of time, but at most another amount of time. And then if something says, hey, after this date, I really don't need to be kept around anymore, that gives me some kind of input that I can work with and say, okay, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this.
To Tianan's point about my point about referrers, like the best way to do garbage collection is to have a strong root of to have a strong root object that you can delete from. And giving clients control of that root is the best way to do garbage collection. I mean,
So now I want to key off of Tianan's response to my comment, to your comment, to now I'm going to make another comment on that, which is if somebody that has push access to a repository can destroy refers, even though they don't have the ability to delete those refers directly, but they implicitly can mask those refers from anybody pulling them, delete them from the API response by pushing a new response. That feels like a situation that's not a very ideal environment.
It sounds like
So
you're asking for immutable tags.
not really. I'm really pushing for the registry should know all the objects that are there and say that it's generating that response for you in the ideal scenario. And that way, if you had access to push the refer, you can send it. And if you have access to delete the refer, you can delete it. But that list is managed by the registry and not by the client pushing some different content.
So the
I
only
can't go-
way to remove something from that list is to delete the content by digest from the registry?
Or to have a garbage collection policy.
Yeah. That's why these two conversations are intertwined for me now.
Yeah.
Because I see what you mean. Like I've thought about this for a lot of different reasons, but like for example, regenerating an SBOM. Say you've got a better SBOM scanner now, and so you regenerate the SBOM, and now there are two of them. How does a client know which one is authoritative, which one to trust, which one to care about?
I'm thinking the other direction. Say you've got two different SBOM generators from two different vendors, and one vendor doesn't like the other vendor. Can they just go out and delete the other person's SBOMs and just say, yep, they don't exist anymore. Goodbye.
I mean, if they
Don't
both
give
got
these
push
people
access to the
access.
repository, yeah.
don't give them
Totally.
access to your repository, I would say.
But
Yeah.
if they only had push access, you wouldn't assume they could delete stuff.
They could overwrite your whole image with that access. That's scary.
Yeah. Push access is destructive. That's why I brought up immutable tags, because that's really what you're dancing around here too, is immutable tags to protect, to make push access safe to hand out more aggressively. And it's not. You can't give push access to someone you don't trust or some tool you don't trust.
Or you could, but we're not going to design every proposal around it. I guess the point is what we should do is, if you want to do that, you can do that, but provide ways to like do stuff your own way. Like my proposal around the refer stuff, it isn't necessarily to say you must do it this way, but you can do it this way. And I know we want to be very prescriptive to clients, but that's just not the boat I'm in. Like we could add an annotation. I think that's fine, but inevitably the next part of the conversation is going to be, hey, why are clients going to add this if registries aren't being forced to implement it?
Yeah, and also if you put it under the common annotation section, should it be within the image would be another thing we should clarify, and then it gets into, oh no, you should attach this and do that. It is more complicated the more, I mean, even specifying annotation would have to call out where it needs to be added, right?
It's also another one of those cases where the content could have expired. The registry can still keep it around as long as it wants to. They might not implement something, but now the client tooling can say, I don't need to present expired content to my users. So the OS discover command or something like that would just say, I'm going to filter all that out unless you pass an extra flag that says show the expired content too. Give you that passing thought there, Sajay. Thanks for sticking around. All right. I think we kind of beat that one enough. Another one, since we've got Derek, I think this might be a good one to think about. Uname and Gname. This is getting into stuff that I don't know enough about
Why is it assumed I know something about it?
because you've been here longer than I have. Did you see this one at all? The uname, gname comment. This was
No, I didn't see it.
1210. Copy the link over here for anybody that needs
I
it.
just know they're never fun to deal with.
Yeah. It's getting into the tar content where most of us are just looking at the UID and GID. But I think this goes way back to a very early version of the spec where it commented and said, hey, the other fields there, the uname and gname, are secondary to UID and GID. We didn't define what secondary meant. I was just taking shots because this goes way back to VBATs doing a very early complete rewrite of the whole file. So there's no real context around any of it.
Yeah, I think you're probably right that this is related to Windows. Because Windows doesn't have UID, GID in the same sense. So names
And-
would be much more relevant there.
And yet when I tried to pull up something like the Golang image and inspect the layer with tar, all I got was everything of UID 0, GID 0, and a couple of extra added fields in there that tar didn't recognize.
And no uname or gname?
No uname, gname, at least as far as tar was telling me in the output.
Right.
Maybe it was there and tar just wasn't showing it to me.
I mean, of course, John's got a tool, but John's got a tool that you might find interesting. The Go code is tiny. It's basically read a tar on standard in and write out all the tar headers as JSON.
Nice.
It's really useful for debugging things like this or inspecting things like this.
Yeah, I might have to give that one a shot, see what it looks like. Thank you for that.
I'll say generally speaking, that handling the uname, gname, and tars is it's a tricky game because what are you supposed to do with it when you're unpacking? There's not
Yeah,
even
I don't
there's
think we reasonably could do anything with it.
The Etsy password Etsy group file could have been a different layer. You might have a different base layer for different images that have the same child layer.
exactly, and it could lead to problems where you definitely don't want to use the host's Etsy password to resolve anything. So it's not good to have. I mean, I don't know what on the Windows, I guess Windows could be different, but at least for how they're handled, I think we just mostly ignore those. I mean, I think if it's coming somewhere like a pod spec or something where you have a rootfs defined, you can do something with it, but with tar unpacking, yeah, there's nothing I would want to do with it.
I will try out John's tool and all the Windows images, see if I can find anything that's got something there that I can dig into more. Otherwise, my inclination is just to say, Tinon already did it. So nobody has ownership. I'm just assuming everything's owned by admin at that point on Windows.
Yeah, that's probably the container administrator user. It's probably like hard coded in the source code somewhere.
That would make sense.
Is this question about it handled? It's not a specific issue, just like, hey, I'm just curious about this thing I saw in the spec.
I get the impression this person might be making their own tooling that consumes. Yeah, they said that there. They're writing their own tool that consumes layers and they're trying to figure out how they're supposed to handle those fields.
But I think it is a legitimate question that we should probably clarify in the spec to say you should ignore uname and gname.
Yeah, saying it's secondary and not saying what secondary means is not good.
I want to say that there was logic in Docker back in the day to allow it, and there does not exist there anymore. We definitely didn't put that in the containerd side. So like at some point it might have been secondary. If there was a UID, it used it. Otherwise it tried to resolve it to something. But I would fear that the try to resolve it was using like a host Etsy password or something, which scary.
I know that some of my builds were failing my reproducibility checks lately because uname and gname were being populated by BuildKit for a short while. And so they stopped populating, everything went back to being happy again in my world. I think they were also populating UID and GID, but they were just including uname and gname just because the field was there.
Fun fact, Git archive now populates uname and, or now always has populated uname and gname with fixed values that are unchangeable and unconfigurable, hard coded in the C.
Wait, which package is it?
Git archive,
Interesting.
which in one of their recent releases, they added a --m time flag so that you can control the timestamp in the generated tarballs, which is really nice. But the uname and gname are still hard coded.
To what? Just curious.
I think it's root. I have to look up the code again.
And then more than likely, even if it is root, the person untarring the file is going to get it with their own ID unless they preserve UID and GID from the tar.
Yeah.
So it sounds like we need to work on a PR at some point.
Yeah, I think I would be fine calling it more out as ignored than secondary. It's like secondary, but if it's, yeah. Technically it is
Should-
secondary, but secondary as in it should just be ignored if it's not there
Yeah.
for.
It's
Should we say it?
it's not like UID and GID are pointers that could be set to undefined. Like they're integers and they always have a value and it's always a valid value.
Should we say that uname and gname are ignored on any platform where UID and GID is valid for a file? Or UID and GID are supported? That would cover Linux, FreeBSD, whatever platform supports those IDs.
I think that's reasonable.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know what the Windows case could be though.
I don't know either, which is why I wasn't being prescriptive. I was being prescriptive in the one use case that I know of.
Yeah, the Windows layers I've looked at don't seem to use that at all. UID, GID, like even the C:users container user folder doesn't seem to be owned by the container user, at least not in any obvious way. I guess there are some PAX records that have MS Windows prefixes that are probably related, and it probably hides like actual ownership somewhere in there.
That's what I think Tara was warning me about. They were saying there are a couple of those extra records they didn't recognize.
Yeah. So that's my best guess. But calling that out explicitly in the spec as like, yeah, uname and gname don't mean anything on Linux sounds really sane to me.
And then for cases where they are used, we'll add those when and if and how they become defined by somebody.
Would it be
Pushing the
helpful
hard
for me
problems off.
to comment that on the issue?
You can comment, or we can open up the PR. I'm good either way.
It's been in my list of things to look at again and comment on for a while now. 3 days, in fact.
Cool.
Yeah,
Thank you
I'll
for that.
comment on it just to help support your argument.
Much appreciated. Thanks for waiting in, Derek. We keep pointing to image spec stuff today.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate hearing from runtime authors and maintainers on all the specs.
Yeah.
Registry operators, like it's extremely valuable to know where the rubber meets the road and how that informs opinions.
I mean, speaking of stuff we want people to weigh in on from the other side of the house, cross-layer hard links, 1204 one that is throughout there. No one wanted to touch this with a 12-foot pole, and I finally broke down and touched it today.
Yeah, I even brought this up privately with our chief tar understander, John, and his reaction was pretty visceral. It's one of those things that, yeah, we technically could support it. It technically could work, but also it shouldn't, and we shouldn't.
That's kind of where my comment went, because I was thinking of all the things that could break with this. Things like an image might be rebased with a different parent layer. Things like when you do the copy on write of a file from one layer to another layer, where does a hard link point to at that point? Does it point to a previous layer? Does it point to the copy on write? You don't know when you do a copy on write whether the inode change as it's going from one layer to another is significant or just implicit in the way the overlay file system works. And so the behavior is very undefined.
I mean, you'd be implicitly pulling that file into the layer, which makes it not reproducible for like going back and recreating the layer. But there's no way to avoid like not having that file now in your layer if you did that.
Yes and no. Now let me take you to the next step, which is, okay, now you've pulled the file into your layer. Now you're 3 layers later and something changes to one of the 2 files. How do you know whether that change was something that changed the inode implicitly or actually completely made a new file with a new inode in that layer and it should no longer be hard linked together? And I think something like that is why John would be like, ooh. So the thought process I went through after going past all that was to say, I would be comfortable saying that this is a limited support feature that is only going to be working within a single layer, and that once a hard link tries to span across 2 layers, that it becomes a copy of a file and it's no longer a hard link. And that's behavior that could be implemented by anybody that's implementing this. We're not defining it specifically, but that is something that may happen.
Yeah, and one other thing that we try to be able to do, I guess not explicitly in the spec, but as an optimization, is not require the file system be mounted to do the unpack, which would definitely be the case here.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily know all the different layers, how the layers can be combined together, thinking of rebasing or something like that.
I mean, the rebasing case would be really weird here because if you tried to recombine it in some way, it's like it'd be different. Like if I recombined it on my file system and then I recombined it from tars and then unpacked, you get a different result.
It could also be a malicious kind of approach where someone says, hey, I know someone has that hard link defined in that layer. Let me build a new image that has that linked file in a prior layer to something that I want to include. They get you to pull their image first. You then dereference that layer, put the file in there the way you want it to, and then someone mounts the original image that you wanted to attack, and now they have a different file content in there. Just because of the order of the way the images were pulled and unpacked. So, yeah, my inclination is to say support for that is limited only within a single layer. Once you go past that, all bets are off.
Yeah, I agree.
Should that be more than just may? Should it be more prescriptive from us of saying, if you ever see this, you should not have a hard link across layers?
I think it's definitely fair to say you should not have a hard link across layers. I mean, I guess the thing is we're not really being, the spec isn't prescriptive in terms of how the file gets unpacked. Like if you could take the tars and you could just unpack them all in place in a single directory, that's fine. You should get the same result. If you're doing overlay and you did that across layers, then yeah, as you said, that's would be really bad, because you could start a container and overwrite a file in a read-only layer, for example. I don't think overlay will choke on that anyways. I'm not even sure, but it might just fail somewhere with an invalid operation. If you try to like explicitly hard link an inode from the file system that's not mapped to the overlay's inodes.
I don't think overlay would know, because it's just going to see the file there.
Yeah, I'm not
It's
sure.
not going to realize you did that.
I would be in favor of a stronger should not between layers.
And do we want to prescribe what the different tooling should do when they see something like that? Should we say tooling should convert to a regular file, or should we?
Well, tooling can't convert it to a regular file, right? Because the whole point of making it a hard link would be that you don't have the file contents in the second layer.
So the tool that created the hard link in the first place would.
Yes.
I would
And so
think at that point the client can error out to say the file doesn't exist.
Yeah, so if a client encounters it, it could throw an error if it's trying to unpack it. If a client is packing it to build the image, it should convert it to a regular file.
Yeah, but I think that's probably in the realm of implementer's note / suggestions, not spec language, right? This is how we suggest you implement this on both sides of it. If you receive one of these, feel free to error out. If you're creating one of these, you should create a copy instead of a hard link.
What do you think, Derek? Are you implementer's note, or leave it as may should language to be a little more prescriptive?
No, that's a tricky one. Let me think. I think I'm in favor of the should not, and then implementer's notes about how to handle that case. I think it basically it should not exist, and how you should handle that. I mean, it should gracefully air out from my perspective. From the hacker's perspective, I feel like you'd have to go out of your way to create that case, but we could mention that. I'm just trying to think how I'd even go about creating that hard link with like determining that this is a hard link that hasn't even been seen in this layer that I'm packing. That would be
They had an example. They actually built a program that went through all the effort of creating hard links when they could have just used Alpine and an ln command. But
effort to do that specifically, though. That's the point.
They put a lot of effort into this. They gave a from scratch image that built this out, and then showed the inodes changing depending on the different tools. And I think they built a build kit, and then they saved and re-imported it or something like that. And they were comparing the different ways that Docker did it, depending on which version of the tooling they were working with, or whether they were working with build kit or Docker save. But it extends beyond just Docker. So looking at the layer spec itself right now, it's just a bunch of bullets. There is no should may. It's a bunch of warnings that, hey, this stuff isn't all that greatly supported because, hey, not all file systems support this kind of stuff. So maybe a few more bullets in there would make sense. Specifically, I'm looking at the layer hard link. file there. Just do it in the chat messages. So yeah, a few more bullets over there. Makes sense to add a little bit more detail. I'm gonna have to read through that for loop logic though. I'm gonna want to do some get blame on who wrote that logic statement in there.
Yeah, that's easy to follow for sure.
Oh, goody. Well, you got a few minutes left. Everything else I think we've already been kind of going over with in previous meetings. So does anybody have passing thoughts before we roll out? I have been puttering on the conformance test a little bit here and there. That conversation in general, how to write some of the conformance tests and some brainstorming around it, I threw that as an agenda item onto the KubeCon in-person discussion, even though I'll be remote on that. If folks have other ideas of things you'd want to see included in there, please do. They're in the HackMD. Fill that out with stuff you want to chat about. Anything else you want to talk about? Going once, going twice.
Just a reminder that in a couple of KubeCon, not too far away, if you're going, we have your room booked. So just a quick November will be here before you know it.
It will. I don't know if anybody here is going. Well, maybe. Derek, are you going or Brian? Either of you.
No, I can't go this time.
So yeah, none of us are going, but hopefully Mike booked his stuff. He's good about that. IBM pays whatever people charge him, so he'll be fine. You'll have a few folks in the room. It's always interesting to see who comes there, doesn't come to these meetings, so that'll be a interesting turnout.
Yeah. Okay.
All righty. Well, there's other stuff on the agenda, but we won't chat about that today. This was all a good discussion. A lot of image spec stuff that we need to clarify that no one ever wanted to talk about before, but would be good to get solidified. So thanks for the time, everybody, and we'll chat back in another week. Have a good rest of the
Bye.
week.